Welcome to the Harvest Ministry Leadership Podcast. My name is Jennifer Eivaz. I'm here with my husband, Ron Eivaz, and we're your hosts today. We are pastors at Harvest Church in Turlock, California. We're a multi-site campus, and we also love leadership. We love all things Holy Spirit, and we have some guests with us today, Michael and Meredith Mauldin, and they are an ordained minister. Michael, you're an ordained minister and a film producer. Meredith, you're a worship leader, a voice actor. You probably know them from UPPERROOM in Dallas, and also the establishment of Song Lab. And so they are inspiring worshipers and impacting culture while cherishing their family. They have 3 children. Amazing. So we're glad to have you with us today, and we're going to talk about all things worship.
Sounds
good.
Right?
I think worship and all things leadership.
Yeah, for sure.
Michael and Meredith are probably some of our favorite people here at Harvest Church. We just love them. And of course, our daughter, that's their
she said we were
most
the real deal. So that
hopefully
was
we will be.
Yeah. So when a PK teenager thinks you're all that means you're the real deal, right?
For real, I've held on to that one.
compliment.
Yeah, it is. I've held on to of all the compliments. I've held on to that one the most, I think.
It's great to have you guys with us here this weekend. Can you just really quick just share a little bit of your personal journey that led you into not only leading worship, but some of the ministry you're doing now with media and arts and all things creative?
Yeah, sure. I think a lot of that for me begins in kind of South Beach of all places. You know, not a place you'd expect to encounter God, but I was pursuing everything that the world values and esteems at the time. And I achieved all of it, and I was more miserable than I've ever been in my life. I say I hit rock top, which is worse than rock bottom, because rock bottom, you have somewhere to go.
That's a new term for me, rock top.
Put your head on the ceiling. It's not comfortable.
That's a T-shirt.
Yeah, and I knew that there was more to life. There had to be more than what I experienced, because I was hanging around people that had more stuff than I had, but it was the same stuff, and they were more miserable than me. And so I was like, well, what are the heights of misery that I can attain to if I keep going down this path? And I just cried out to God one night, and the power of God hits me sovereignly, plasters me to the floor, wears off. The next night I'm praying again. I have this open vision. I'm seeing Jesus going to the cross. It was like an open window into 2,000 years ago. And he turned and looked at me, and his eyes lit up with this white light. And it was like he could see me seeing him 2,000 years into the future. And I knew in that moment that what he was doing was for me. And everything in my life changed. I went sober, celibate, and I had this vision because I was so influenced by the media and films growing up as a kid. I didn't grow up in the church. And so I was this gangster kid, discipled by gangster films and gangster rap of the 90s, total thug. But I had this revelation. I was like, where are the next generation of storytellers that are telling like world-class stories that make Jesus look relevant? And because this is the greatest stories the world has ever known. And who are those that are telling stories for the next generation to look up to and have role models? And so I was went deep dive into that, and I met her along the way, and we moved to Los Angeles to try to be lights in the entertainment industry. And while I was there, because I think outside of that revelation of encountering Jesus there, I was lying in my bed in LA. And I woke up one morning and I screamed, "It's all about worship," which is where the title of the book comes from.
Okay.
And something dropped into my spirit. I had no really understanding of why people sang songs in church. I didn't understand worship. I was a brand new believer. It's like my first year in.
So you were not raised in the church?
No.
He didn't even know why people sang songs in church.
Wow.
No, she grew up listening to Salty the Singing Songbook. I grew up listening to Rick James. Little different.
The two worlds came together.
Yeah.
Totally.
And so, but within that, I had this moment, and I was like, it's all about worship. And this revelation hit me that the ultimate battle is going to be over worship. Who's going to be worshiping? Everything's vying for our affections and our attention. And so it sent us off on this journey to what does it look like to truly worship God? Because we become that which we behold, and then the question then becomes, how do you behold an invisible God?
Wow.
How'd you guys meet?
Yeah. How did we meet? We met at an acting job.
Okay.
We met at an acting job, yeah.
All right.
Radio Shack. We call it the Love Shack.
Oh, you guys were doing a commercial for Radio Shack?
Yes.
It was like an industrial film kind of a thing, training videos.
Yeah. Yes.
Wow.
Love at first sight or fifth sight?
Yeah, something like that.
Okay, all right.
We didn't actually go on a date for quite a bit after we'd met for the first time in the Radio Shack, but yeah.
Yes.
That sounds funny.
Very good.
Now, in a little bit, we want to get into the book about worship, but just as you're talking about our affection of what's going to get our affection and worship, how did filmmaking get into that for you? The whole creative aspect of filmmaking that you do.
Yeah.
How does worship play into that? And you know what I'm saying in terms of what you do for the Lord.
Totally. Well, I think I was looking at it from, that idea that, Marshall McLuhan said, you become what you behold. And I saw how much I was influenced by what I was looking at. Because the reason I was drawn towards the mafia was because I saw a version of what looked like men who were willing to lay down their lives for each other. I saw a version of brotherhood that was like this unconditional love, though it'd be a twisted version of it. And then when I found Jesus, he says, greater love has no one than this, the one lays down his life for his friends. I was like, man, I want to see that on a screen. What does that look like in real life? And I think you can talk about it from, what we do in our vocation as a form of worship, right? So that I think those two things went together for me of telling God's stories, but then also that I felt called to do it. So it was a form of worship as well.
Wow. Now, when did Upper Room come into the picture?
Mm-hmm.
That was quite a bit later.
Quite a bit later.
Yeah. So when he had that encounter, we were in Los Angeles, and we had a crazy story, which I don't even know if we'll go into today, but we went from Los Angeles to be lights in the entertainment industry, end up doing YWAM in the Middle East 6 months into our marriage.
Okay, that's huge.
Yes,
living in the West Bank of Israel.
We living in the West Bank of Israel, yes.
Right.
So we had this crazy, we went into missions. And for me personally, I'd been an actor and a singer. I did jazz music. I did all this kind of stuff. So I was willing to give my 10% at church.
Right.
But I didn't even know what this worship thing really, really was.
I read that he was a little concerned about that.
Yeah. So I was a little concerned about that. It's like, yeah, you're good, Mayor, but, it's missing something is what he would tell me.
Okay.
But we ended up going there, and I thought we were just going to lay it down for a little while. I'd been going after the acting thing for the last 10 years. My managers are saying, oh, you're the next thing, and da-da-da-da, all this stuff. And so we were going to go do the missions thing. I was going to do that for a little while and then come back and continue, right? But there, Michael had a ton of favor. I did not have a ton of favor where I was at. And I felt like the Lord kept asking me, would you be willing to stay? Would you be willing to stay in the Middle East? And I was like, and do what? It was like, there's no acting, there's no singing, there's no any of the things that I've been doing for the last 10 years that I thought was God's plan for my life, or it was at least my godly plan.
Right.
And then I remember sitting in a very cold day. It was a very cold day, and they were out doing mission stuff, and I just was like, Lord, I don't understand why you're asking me to do this, but I'm willing. And in that moment, I had an encounter.
There you go.
Where Jesus came, and basically, it wasn't an audible voice, but it might as well have been. And it was like, you are called to be a worshiper. And you know how when the Lord says something, it's like, it's so different.
Yeah.
It's not. It's like he says something so simple, and it means so much. Everything that I'd been going after paled in comparison to the King of Kings asking me to come and worship him. And it was like everything shifted in me. My identity, everything changed. It was like all I could think of. I mean, I could do that in my closet. I could do that anywhere. I don't need a stage. I don't need crowds. The King of Kings, is asking me to sing for him. And it was like everything changed. I didn't care. I didn't want to act anymore. I didn't care about it. I didn't want to do anything else but learn what it meant to truly worship the Lord.
Wow.
It's amazing to me how one encounter can just shift everything.
Everything.
And just put it in place. It's amazing.
So were you involved in worship leading prior to that?
I would sing every once in a while at church. But
so
it was
that changed everything.
Everything. And I had no desire to do it. I had a bad attitude about it even. I was like, the church is for people who can't make it in the real world.
Yeah.
That was my attitude. I am not saying that's a good attitude. But that's where I was. But that just shows you that I had no idea what worship really was.
Yeah.
I thought it was singing in church. It was just whatever that was. And then when you have an encounter with the King of Kings, it meant so much more, and everything else I could care less about. I have no regrets for giving all that up. A lot of times they're like, well, do you have regrets of this? Absolutely not. I went after what I know. I'm going to be a worshiper forever.
Yeah.
That can't be taken away from me because he's the one who asked me to do it, and I'll be a worshiper for eternity.
Right.
So it changed me.
So that kind of becomes the heart then behind what you guys began to do with Upper Room.
Absolutely.
Yes.
So that put us on a course of like, what does it truly look like to worship the Lord? And that's what we have gone after for the last like 19 years. Lord, what does it look like to truly worship? And so from that, he's had some other encounters that totally rocked our world. And then I feel like we've just gone on this journey. And then Upper Room was a place where we got to really implement and experiment. And what does the Lord love? And what's the language to go after him? And all of that. So that was
Fascinating. And so how do you bring people along into that? Because it's obvious the fruit of the encounter is on the experience and what we're seeing on the outside. But actually taking people into that path and bringing them along. Can you describe that journey? And, that must be challenging.
Yes, at times, and no at times. I mean, I think because of the nature of the other encounter that I had in Jerusalem with the angels situation, which was, I don't know if you want to go into that, but
I love talking about angels.
okay. So that might be.
so she was. You want to go ahead and set that up because she was struggling, like shifting from becoming a performer to a worshiper. She's like, I don't want to perform for God. I want to worship God. What does that look like? And so we got around her in a small group and just began to pray. And this one girl goes, Lord, I pray that you show Meredith what happens in the spiritual realm when she worships you. And she goes, and show her right now. And I was all offended by this prayer. I was like, you can't tell God what to do. I was like, it offended me. But something, I guess because we're one, God didn't show her, he showed me, and my spiritual eyes were opened up in the eternal realm. And I see this whole host of angels. And in a split second, I knew what they were thinking. I could feel what they were feeling. There was some for ministering, warring, deliverance, healing. And I knew what their destinies were, and they were screaming with everything inside of their being for her to sing to God because they couldn't be released into the earth to do what they were created to do until she released her song to God. And man, it messed me up. It short-circuited me. I went to the ground, fell to the ground crying.
He's not a faller. He has never fallen before that, and I've never seen him like really fall like that ever. But he hit the ground.
And I was weeping uncontrollably for like 20 minutes, and I carried this heavenly burden ever since that moment. And there'd be moments, I didn't talk about it for about a year because I was so like, it was such a holy thing. I was like, is this even biblical what I'm seeing? I had no biblical context for it.
And he couldn't talk about it without crying.
I would cry and she'd be in the kitchen. I'd be like, you gotta sing, this heavenly burden, you gotta sing. And she's like, right now, what? I'm making stew. I was like, I don't know, you just gotta sing. And so the easy part came for me because I feel like I'm this cattle prod for worshipers. I can't sing, I can't play an instrument, but I'm jealous for the gift of God that's in other people. And I also feel that heavenly burden for them to do what they're created to do because heaven is waiting and wanting to come into our space, and worship is such that vehicle and that avenue to make that happen, that highway. So,
yeah, I think, I think when you're truly passionate about something, it brings those along who are truly passionate and hungry for it too. Like, I think the authentic pursuit of that attracts other people who are authentically hungry in pursuing that. Now, there was still a lot of learning curves, and there was a lot of educating and teaching and, processing. We did lots of processing.
And coaxing people and encouraging. Because the culture at the Upper Room, you look now, you see dancing and everything else. It was not that in the beginning. People would come to the front, they'd sit down, they're just real quiet.
We didn't sing.
Come on, guys! Come on up! It's God.
Wow.
Yeah. And so it shifted over time.
It did shift over time, I mean, it was a process for us all to enter into. Yeah. We had to have the freedom to make mistakes. Yeah. Because we didn't all know what we were doing. Spontaneous is scary. Right. When you've never done that before. I remember when they were like, all right, we're going to try to make space. Like, we want to make space. We always worship for 45 minutes or, around that time. And it'd be like, we're going to sing 6 songs and we just like sing them all the way through, right? And then it was like, what if we leave a little bit of space? And I was like, but what if nothing happens and we run out of songs? Yeah. And you get, then what, And there's this scary tension of,
I like that word, tension.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, and how do you navigate that? How do you balance that? What would you tell people about that? Because that's the hard thing. If I can script it, then I feel like I'm in control.
Totally. Yes. I'm in control.
And I can pretty much gauge the outcome. But if I leave aspects unscripted, fill it in.
Yeah. If you leave, then God could show up.
Yeah.
And he could respond to our
And he
song.
could respond. And I'm like, and in the end, that's what we want.
Yeah.
You know, and if it was us and we just sang some songs that day and we left some room and we went for it, then we still honored the Lord, you know. But I think that there's something that would happen when he would come when we risk.
Yeah.
When we would take the risk to be like, I'm not in control and I don't know what to do. And we had to create a safe environment for our worship leaders to, you know, to be able to step out and do that and have a safe place to do that and make.
And actually fall on their face.
And fall on your face.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
And
mean,
we had a lot of that in the
We
beginning.
did. I remember we were trying to leave a little bit more room, and this one guy went spontaneous for 45 minutes straight and didn't bring anybody with him. And I don't know if even the Lord was even there, you know?
But he had a good time.
He had a great time. He did.
I call that splashing in the pool.
Yeah, just kind of treading water. Yes.
Well, I think that's a great discussion because a lot of people listening to this podcast are either pastors or leaders in a local church. And that's the tension I think we've had to deal with the last 25, 26 years of pastoring here.
Yeah.
Because, you know, we have a real love for the presence and the flow of the Holy Spirit. But at the same time, you know, there's systems and structures. There's
Yes,
a
totally.
teaching to do. There's all that. And
Yeah.
just in working with pastors over the years, I think that's probably one of the main questions I get is how do you allow room for the spontaneity and the flow, but yet you have to, you know, move the church forward
You
and
have
have
to
the
go
structure.
somewhere.
You're going
and all
somewhere
that.
and yes.
So from a worship and creative standpoint, what encouragement would you give pastors listening to this right now on how to move things forward in the area of worship in their church?
I think it really has to begin with the pastor.
It does.
You know, and from him allowing to have that space there. And I think the pastor should also see himself as a worship leader and be able to come up and help direct the worship or say, hey guys, let's leave some room right here. Or maybe let's sense what the Lord is doing and help kind of tour guide the process a little bit. And maybe nothing happens. Maybe God shows up. But if nothing happens, okay, we tried, we move on. Okay, then let's get to the sermon or whatever else.
Yeah.
But if God breaks in, then, you know, then it's different, you know, and then that can help dictate what the sermon is.
I love
and
what
everything
you're
else, too.
saying. It's kind of like what you mentioned prior, that you were the cattle prod.
Yeah.
And it sounds to me, if I'm hearing you correctly, you're saying to pastors, hey, go ahead and prod
Yes.
the congregation.
On the
Yes.
congregation and your worship leaders.
Right.
Like there's sometimes I could sense that there was a worship leader on the stage that had a song in them. But they were too afraid to release it. And I would I would walk up on the stage and they'd go, hey, you got something? They look at me and I go, just go. You know, giving them permission. All of a sudden there's agreement in the spirit. And that in that agreement, man, there's something that gives them faith to step out in their gift. And man, we see the Lord move so many times in that. They just need permission, you know, a lot of times. Or maybe it's on the drummer. Just go ahead to the drummer, like what you're doing. Stay there, do that. It's so anointed. Because when David would play sometimes, demons would flee from Saul, right? It didn't say he was singing a song. It says he's playing an instrument. So sometimes there's something on just the instruments. And I think when we would start to value the musicians as well in that way, they would come alive and the Spirit of God would move through them.
I will say though that we got to experiment a lot in prayer sets. It wasn't always a Sunday night.
It's
which
very
is
different.
It is
That's
a
a good
different
point.
thing, and we got to experiment a lot in those prayer sets where you have more room, where you can explore
Totally.
more, you can call people out. Now, would it flow into Sundays? It would.
Yeah.
Now, it is a little bit different. Now, I would speak from the worship leader point of view on that question and say, as a worship leader, you need to honor what your pastor is allowing you to do and where he's, you know, like if you come in and you're like, well, I know better and I'm going to do this or whatever else, you're going to hit a ceiling. It's just not going to work. You have to have that unity and agreement and coming under and serving.
Yeah.
Now, when your pastor gives you a little bit of room and you honor that, and then he's like, why don't we take it a little further? Then he trusts you enough to that point where you can then like take it to the next place, but you have to be in agreement.
Can you speak into that a little bit more? Because I hear, you know, the rebellious voice come out of people, and they're frustrated because
Yeah.
they want
More
the
of
presence
God.
of God. I realize what they want, but getting there and the process of getting there, they're not always understanding how to build that. Can you flesh that out a little bit more?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's one of those things where a lot of times we see where we want to go, but we haven't been able to take everybody else with us. The congregation hasn't gone there with us. And then again, then we're not in unity. And a pastor is supposed to be shepherding the whole body. And he is the one that, like there's an authority there. And to honor authority and say, okay, I'd love to go to this place. So you can talk about it. Like I would love to be more spontaneous. I'd love more room, all that, talk through those things. But then I think when you have the authority position to say yes to it, you have a different grace on you that allows you then permission to go. Mm-hmm. And I don't know what it is whenever somebody, like, there is a different kind of an authority that you have because you're under authority. Yeah. Now you're under the safety of protection. Yeah. I don't know if that's the right word. Authority. Yeah. Yes. And I think that there's a covering that you have. Yeah. Mm-hmm. When I was the worship leader and I had people and they were learning to go spontaneous, I would say, if you have something, I want you to look at me. And if I'm like, yeah, it's a good time, then you can go there. And then I can support them. Because I might be going somewhere. I might be like, wait just a second. I'm going somewhere. Let's hold off for just a second. This is as worship leaders,
Mm-hmm.
But
right.
It's like learning the authority and the trust of where we're going. Well, you have to do that with the main pastor as well. He's got somewhere he's going, and you got to come underneath that. But it's safe that way because when I would say, yes, go, then I'll come underneath and support you.
Because if they go out there, launch out, and they get stuck or they get lost,
I'm able to come and support you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's great.
That's really good.
That's a great
I
point.
think also like having those, creating a safe space to learn that maybe not be on a Sunday.
Yeah.
Maybe it's a Wednesday service or something like that, or a prayer time. Mm-hmm. Is super valuable.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we have night watch prayer times once a month. And that's a great time
Yeah,
for.
there's a worship segment there that's the whole point of it, is to develop the spontaneity within the teams.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and I think, there's always a tension. I think when you want to go after things in God, you're always going to have a tension. Now, we could call it a tension between just being open and giving room versus control, which is, to me, is not control, but there's competing is not the best word, but there's these competing things that are happening at the same time, and I love spontaneous worship. Worship is a big part of what we do as a church. And but one of the things that I know, again, maybe you could speak into this. I've been speaking to our worship leaders about it for some time because back in the I'm a little bit older, so I kind of remember things from maybe even 15, 20 years ago. The big thing in worship was as worship began to shift, which was a great thing because we went from hymn songs, 30 years ago to remember the whole Jewish theme kind of stuff that was happening, right?
Yeah. The pageantry,
the flags, and the banners. So as things, in about 15 years ago, a statement that was very popular among worship leaders was, "Well, I'm just leading worship for the audience of one," which was I totally agree with the heart behind that, and it was awesome. But it kind of then got mistranslated in worship leaders as, "I'm just here to worship." And you all could follow along with me
whatever.
If you want.
Yeah.
And so I tell our worship leaders is you can't just have your own worship experience up there.
No, yeah.
Because yes, you're a worshiper, but you're also a leader.
Mm-hmm.
So you need to lead people into an experience. And I see that sometimes, especially with younger worship leaders who are not as experienced, and they'll hear a idealistic statement like that and not know how to put it in the right context.
Right.
And so they'll just be like, "I'm just going to be up here, close my eyes, kneel, and I'm just going to worship," but nobody's is with them.
Right.
And so, can you speak to that dynamic a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead.
I'll just give just a quick thing, and then you can speak to it as a worship leader. Because I think one of the most important things in a room when you're leading is unity. And how do you unify a room when people are coming from all different backgrounds and places? And I think there takes a little bit of gift of exhortation, and there's different tools that you can try and implement to get everybody unified. Whether it's a gratitude activation, or it's getting people to hold hands or shout or something where you're unifying the room. And I think when that takes place, I've seen the Lord move in the most incredible ways in the place of unity. So,
yeah, for sure. In having your worship leaders not get lost off in their own little prophetic world,
sure.
And then not being able to, you're kind of tour guiding people somewhere. Now, I think some of it has to do with your song choices. I would say, for me personally, because we would get into the conversation a lot of you pick a song that you love a lot, but it's really kind of just more about what you're wanting to do for God, or there's a whole, and
Okay.
and
This
you're
is
kind
good.
of off into your own little artistic world, which in your own time, that song is awesome,
Right.
But is it a corporate song where we can all have our eyes focused on the Lord, what he's doing, who he is, what he's done? Because when we focus all this way, then we're all unified on Jesus.
Yeah.
I went to a conference one time and I was speaking, and I guess they didn't coach the worship person. And I think they did 3 or 4 of the songs that they had just wrote. Not really,
That Jesus loved.
that Jesus loved.
Jesus loves it, yes.
And I kept thinking to myself, okay, and I didn't have the authority to say,
Right.
you know what, let's not do that again. But it's just little things like that, or keeping your eyes open to see what's happening in the room. Can you give like little practical tips on how to lead that room? Because I've been in many situations where they weren't quite trained.
Right. And training is like, because I will say, eyes open, there's the performance side of things where you're like, okay, everybody smile and stand in your place. And that's not going to be like, I'm not going to, that's not my thing per se.
Yeah.
I'm like, I want us to all worship, but I can't, again, go off on my own to do that. I think, I'll say preparation is important.
Okay.
The Lord told me a long time ago, whenever we had a whole crazy thing happen, where we had no preparation. It'd been told to me like, oh, don't prepare. We were in front of 10,000 people. We did not prepare because they wanted us to be spontaneous.
Oh.
Okay.
So don't
we didn't
prepare.
have a point person. We didn't have who was going to be the worship leader. We were all just going to lead together. We didn't get a sound check and nobody could hear ourselves.
Oh,
it was the
wow.
perfect recipe disaster.
You'll tell me the name of the person later, right? So,
So you will not
that?
speak there.
who did that?
And anyways, it was a mad, crazy disaster. I had worship leaders running on the stage, singing some things. I had 4 of my worship leaders lose their voice.
Because they were all
And I
singing
had
over
to
top
cover
of
for
each
them
other.
songs. They started songs that they did not know. This is in front of 10,000
Started songs
people.
they
We're
didn't know?
supposed to be, yes, starting songs that they did not know the words to.
So they'd get out there and then get lost in the song.
It was like,
just always finish with
I
la,
could
la, la,
not
la.
wait. That was the longest set of my entire life.
my.
Like I was like, get me off of this stage, get our worship leaders off of this stage. And at the end of it, I think I had one worship leader going, we're not quiet, we are loud. And I was like, what are we doing? I was like, I processed I was like, we didn't point anybody to Jesus. No, we didn't point them to Jesus at all. We didn't do any of what we normally do. We all just freaked out because we had no structure.
Yeah.
Structure gives you
Love
safety.
it.
Yeah.
I love it.
The Lord told me, mothers put structure for children for them to feel safe. You can throw that structure out at any time, but you can't create it in the moment.
Yeah.
And so having a structure of I would even, when I had worship leaders who were going in the spontaneous, I would always put somebody who I knew was a solid worship leader who was always going to point us back to Jesus.
Right.
Who was always going to bring us back to that strong chorus that's going to lead us to just, point at Jesus again. And then I'd have a spontaneous person and they'd take us on a little journey and then I'd bring them back and point back at the Lord.
So spontaneity really isn't spontaneity the way that at least we would think it would be defined.
In some ways, yes.
It's more of we give a window,
we leave room.
but at the end of the day, we're gonna have some structure around it.
Structure.
Yes.
Kind of like an unwritten, unspoken structure.
Yeah, it's super helpful. And I think even in the spontaneous thing, I think there's this misconception that it has to come super created in the moment, like you've never heard these words before.
Right. I don't agree with that. I can tell you don't either.
Yeah, I don't. It can happen, but a lot of times you'll speak to this, but a lot of times it comes from your private time, your time with
100%
Jesus,
it
these
does.
little
Yes.
intimate moments with him that all of a sudden that gets highlighted and pulled into these.
I always call that planned spontaneity.
Yeah.
Yeah, when it's something you've already had there. Now,
Right.
I have had sets where it's like I have gone through the set, and we listened for what the Lord was doing. I'm always going to ask the question too. This is one thing. Here's a practical tool: is this for me, or is this for the room? Is this for the Lord? Is this personal? Like when I get a spontaneous song, if I'm like wanting to stay on something, I'm going to ask the question: is this for me personally? Or is it for a bigger, do I need to share this with other people? That is always a question. The other thing I'm always asking is I'm like, what is the Lord doing in this? I'm looking for who he's showing himself as in that moment. I'm listening. If there's something in the song that he's highlighting on, I'm like, okay, if we're singing on something and then all of a sudden healer is lined up, like it's highlighted, then I'm like, he wants to reveal himself as healer. So I might stay there longer and start waiting for, Lord, are you saying more about yourself as healer? Then what's crazy is when then the healer comes in the room, then you can start praying out of that place.
Yes.
Then then it's like we work together and Michael's like, okay, I think God wants to do some healing right now. Of course, these are oftentimes prayer sets,
yeah.
but it's like when you're listening, because it's worship is more than, it's a conversation. We're worshiping a man. And the point is to connect our hearts and to honor him. And there's lots of different ways, that can happen, but we're wanting to know how he's wanting to come, how he's wanting to be honored. That's the greatest.
I love this conversation because I can tell that pastors and leaders, worship leaders, are going to be hearing the tension, even in our conversation. We're having this beautiful conversation, but they're going to be hearing it through different ears. And I think that's going to be great to get the feedback on that.
Yeah.
Is there like one or two more things that you want to speak to either worship leaders or ministers in general? Is there something that's really on your heart that you just like, we need to give some instruction or give some wisdom about?
I think you should talk about, I think sometimes there's this pressure of picking songs for the congregation.
Yeah.
And how do you do that when someone's had the worst day of their life, someone's had the best day of their life?
How do you pick songs when you've had somebody who's walked in the room who's had the worst day of their life? And
That's such a good point.
I don't pick songs for them. I pick songs for the Lord.
Yeah. Yeah.
When I pick songs that focus on him, when he comes in the room, he can meet both of them.
Yeah.
And the pressure is off of me.
You're not there to change them. He
I
changes
can't
them.
change them.
Yeah.
My best efforts and my best singing fall really short.
Yeah.
But when I focus on Jesus, when I'm there to minister to his heart and sing to him and sing what he's done, when all of heaven is attracted to the testimony of Jesus. All of heaven loves to hear the testimony of Jesus. And when I used to put my songs out and I would read them out loud, and because the Lord gave me this really profound thing. When we were praying for blueprints for the upper room, we were like, Lord, what are we called to do as a church? I think that's always a very important question to ask each congregation because he calls us to different things. But I was asking at the upper room, Lord, what are we called to do? What are our blueprints? And he said, Meredith, what if you threw a banquet in honor of me every time you came together to worship? What if you threw a banquet in honor of me? What songs would you sing at a banquet in honor of Jesus? What testimonies would you tell? And it just bing, turned on this light because I realized so many of the songs that I was picking were songs of telling him what I wanted to do for him, what I needed him to do for me, all these other things, which there's places for those songs. I'm not saying that they're not valid. There's declaration songs. There's all kinds of different types of songs, and they all have their place, and they're all beautiful in time. But I would lay out my songs, and I would go, would I sing this at a banquet in honor of Jesus? And I would read it out loud. And I realized at that time, because this was before Bethel had come on the scene, this, we weren't writing. We were starting to write. But I realized I couldn't find songs that just praised God and said what he did and thank you or any of those things.
Just to honor him for who he is.
Yeah, it was stuff like I'm waiting for you, or and none of those things are wrong to say. Or it was like I'm gonna dance for you, or I'm gonna
I'm going to praise you.
I'm going to praise you. But so we realized we're like, wow, but where are the songs that are just saying, Jesus, you came, you showed up, you did this, and line those things up. And when I got that in my head, if I'm going to throw a banquet in honor of Jesus, this is for him. It was like everything changed for me.
So good.
What I love about this conversation is because Jesus is the central point of the service.
Yeah.
Yes.
And our worship, our preaching, everything that we do is about him showing up.
Yeah.
Like one of my friends says, when Jesus shows up, a lot happens.
A lot happens.
When I show up, nothing happens.
For sure.
So I think, and it's the same thing. Again, that tension, I think, and to me, it's not really a tension when we understand this, between creativity and presence, right? So creativity is a gift from God. So we want to use that creativity,
Absolutely.
Whether it's in worship, movie making, or even preaching.
Speaking,
yeah. So as we were talking about worship, preaching is a lot like that in the sense of you study, you prepare, but you prepare your heart.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then when you get something in your devotion, it's like, is that for me today, or is that for the congregation?
Yes.
Exactly.
So is that tension that you go through. And I think I've seen this both in preaching and in worship in years past, where sometimes we think getting there on Sunday is about the creativity. So sometimes preachers are so creative with their message, I don't know what the heck you're trying to say. It was fun. The play on words were cool, but there was Jesus didn't show up. But your communication was pretty creative.
Yeah. It was,
And I think sometimes we could do that with worship too.
Yes,
we could try to do creative songs and how the band just does it just right, but Jesus wasn't there.
oh, yeah.
Right? So the central point is all about him showing up.
Yes.
Right.
And he's the focus.
Exactly.
Okay.
We had lots of that tension too, that at the upper room, honestly, in the early days when I was like, guys, could we they'd give me their set list and I'd be like, we've got like 3 asking songs. Could we maybe switch out 1 or 2 of those just for like a,
Just in the beginning.
And I remember, this is early days,
But I meant like at the beginning of the set.
just in the beginning of the set. Could we just switch out a couple of those? And I remember them telling me later on, some of our main worship leaders that everybody knows, if they follow Upper Room, and they're like, they're just like, don't respect my creativity. And
Now, why is that, do you think, with worship leaders? Are those songs easier to do? Are the songs just they don't understand the theology of it, or what is it?
I think it's a little bit of both. They were like, that's how they felt in the beginning, and then they're like, all right, we're just going to do it because we love Meredith and because we think, and because I'm teaching on this and and then they were like, and then it changed my life. They were like, then it clicked, and and this light bulb went off, and now all they do is talk. They're 100% in, like this Thanksgiving and praise changed my life, and so then now they preach it more than I do.
So the encounter you start bringing others into the same encounter.
Yes.
Right.
If I know we're about to wrap it up here in a moment, but I kind of want to go on a little bit of a different tangent a little bit. This is just for me. She's like, where are you going with this?
Is this spontaneous tangent we're about to go on?
It's spontaneous. It was not planned.
I like this.
I'll pull it in. If
All right. Yes, there you go.
But it's the right time. But I met you, Michael, a few years ago. I forget the exact date, or it was 2 years or 3 years ago. We met down in Southern California at a apostolic roundtable that we were both invited to. And it was, I think, the week after, or just a few days after, we had done the public showing at 2 of our campuses of the documentary or movie you made called
Super
Spreader.
Super Spreader. I just had it, but I was trying to, I was pausing for effect.
Yes.
Anyway, Super Spreader.
Dramatic.
And actually, we sold tickets. Both of our locations were packed out.
Oh, wow.
And I was at one of the locations and just in the front row watching that thing. And I knew it was going to be good.
That's good.
But
Did you really?
I did. I did, actually. But at the end, it seemed like everybody was just in tears, and just the impact that it made. One was powerful just because the way you made the movie. Again, it's just the creativity and just how well you did that was just powerful. That was part of it. But the other part was also the story you told, right? The stories were powerful, not just how you filmed it.
Yeah.
Can you just give us a real quick what that was all about for you and what you were trying to communicate to the body of Christ?
Yeah, it was very challenging because there were so many different storylines, because obviously it took place in COVID, worship in the middle of that. Of course, the film is about worship, First film God leads me to direct happens to be about worship. And I think, there was a few different storylines I wanted to tell in that, but I think the biggest one for me was the freedom aspect of what worship does, and how worship. The film is a film about freedom through the lens of religious freedom, and how I believe that all freedoms come from that place. And if we don't have that, it leads to lockdowns, bondage, which ultimately the metaphor of that is in like the story we really hit on suicide. Mm-hmm. So people who are in ultimate bondage to where they don't want to live anymore, right? But encountering God, they would get set free and liberated in that process. And so that touched home for me most because of my brother. And the first Let Us Worship event I did was in Tampa, was on his birthday. And we saw all these people that were struggling with suicide and depression get set free. And
because his brother had committed
my brother had committed suicide years prior. And so I wanted that to be a part of the narrative, but I didn't know how central it was going to be until my director, my editor were like, we need to really lead the film this way. And so I can't take credit for all of it. Josh Frainer, my director, did a phenomenal job. Tom, my editor, phenomenal editor. And so I just thank God that he was able to bring the right team together of really creative people. I didn't want to hire people I just wanted to hire people who were excellent and understood craft and story. And so I wanted to honor God in the story. And when you're making the film, our first rough draft of it was horrible. I was so scared. It was so bad. I was like, oh no, this is going to be horrible, and we just kept working and kept working. We kept praying and seeking God, and he just kept helping us to shape the story. And so I have to give a lot of credit to the Lord for leading us in it, because I don't know if I'm that great of a storyteller.
Now, looking now at a few years later, or we're about 5 years almost after COVID. Mm-hmm. Now with the elections just passed.
Yes.
With Trump back in office now, or soon will be back in office. Yeah. But as long as I'm concerned, it's already done. Anyway, so feels like it anyway.
Yeah.
Is how do you see America has changed in these last 5 years? Because it has changed. This is not the same America.
No, it's not. And it's moving in a really powerful direction.
Yeah.
I went to a Trump rally right before the election in Atlanta. For pastors. And then right before the event, somebody made a comment about, one of Kamala's meetings, somebody said, Jesus is King, Jesus is Lord. And they're like, well, you're at the wrong rally. So somebody brought that up. All of a sudden, the stadium, 27,000 people started erupting into this chant, Jesus is King, Jesus is Lord, Jesus is King, Jesus is Lord, for like 5 minutes. And all of a sudden, I have this flashback to 2008. I'm lying in my bed in McKinney, Texas, and I'm seeing stadiums full of people. And I knew it was a revival in my vision, but I saw these red baseball caps all throughout the stadium. And for years, we'd go to the calls. I'd look for red hats. I'm like, well, maybe
we tried to translate.
I mean, maybe it's the blood of Jesus on people's heads. All this.
We would interpret.
And as I'm seeing this chant happen, I'm looking at all these "Make America Great Again" hats on. I'm going, God, is this revival?
Yeah.
And I'm like, how often does Jesus come throughout history and people don't recognize him?
Yeah, powerful.
And this is just a different kind of revival taking place that's actually leading to a reformation. And I'm overwhelmed by it. I'm still trying to understand it, but we're in a different America right now.
Make America revived again.
Yes. Right. Well, we've been with Michael and Meredith Mauldin. They've authored the book, It's All About Worship, and you probably know them most from Upper Room. And today, my husband and I, Ron Eivaz, you know me as Jennifer Eivaz, we are here at Harvest Church in Turlock, California, and we are leading Harvest Ministry Network. And so if you're a minister and you're looking for like-minded community and to be resourced, join us at HMNetwork.org and check it all out, and we hope to see you soon. Thank you.